Welcome you all both to the second edition, actually, of the Greenwall Kickback. We're going to take a deep dive today into this, what I think is going to be like a pivotal moment in American history, the potential rescheduling of cannabis. Arguably one of the most influential drug policy changes in the last 50 years. I suspect it's going to happen before the end of the year, but I think that President Biden is going to come out with an announcement of his position on the matter in the next, month or two, sort of around his March 6th State of the Union address. And so I wanted to talk to both of you about what your thoughts are on the matter. I want to understand what you think about, it having been scheduled as a Schedule I drug, what descheduling means to you and your communities, and then just, sort of not shoot the shit, but kind of shoot the shit and see what your thoughts and feelings are around this. And so joining us today, guys, are two friends of mine. One is Rafi Crockett. She is the producer of the DC Cannabis documentary and statehood documentary called Higher Power. She was also a former commissioner with APRA in Washington, DC. Thank you very much for joining us, Rafi, today. And then Tony Lewis Jr., who is a community leader, also a friend of mine. He's a workforce development specialist, a reentry expert, and then a champion for children with incarcerated parents. And he had firsthand experience with his father having been incarcerated. I think we were probably 9 or 10 years old, 8 years old, right? Okay. And both of these folks are native Washingtonians, as am I, so I'm glad to have them on the show with us today. So, Rafi, we know that rescheduling is coming down the pike. We've had this conversation for several years now, but I think that in light of the 2024 elections, there were some really smart folks who have kind of politicized this and made it an issue that they want to champion. And I think the interesting thing about that is that we have both Republicans and Democrats championing this, because this is an issue that sort of transcends politics in many ways, with 70% of the country in favor of full legalization. So tell us a little bit, in your own words, of what rescheduling means, and then what it means for African Americans in particular, in your opinion.
Sure. So rescheduling is not what we asked for. We asked for full freedom from implications of using and selling cannabis. We want full decriminalization. We want full descheduling. So what rescheduling is going to do is move it from a Schedule I substance to potentially a Schedule III substance, as recommended by HHS. It's now in the DEA's hands to determine if they're going to follow that recommendation or do something else. And what that really means for Black people is absolutely nothing. Nobody is going to be released from prison as a result. Nobody is going to stop being arrested as a result. People will continue to face deportation and other ICE-related events with rescheduling to Schedule III. Black people will still be disproportionately arrested and impacted by using, selling, producing this drug. Here in Washington, D.C., Black folks are 8 times more likely to be arrested for cannabis-related offenses than white people are. That's 8 times. I think across the nation, it's just under 4 times, but in DC, we're 8 times more likely to be negatively impacted. Folks are not going to be freed from the collateral consequences of those arrests, of those incarcerations. They still won't have access to benefits. So rescheduling is not the answer. It's definitely not the answer for Black people and brown people. It's not the answer for poor people. And despite some people in the industry thinking otherwise, it's not necessarily the answer for small businesses either.
Talk a little bit about that, because this Greenwall Kickback is really focused. My hope is that we will be able to have conversations around the intersectionality of cannabis, culture, community, and certainly business and politics. So tell us a little bit about how you think it will not be of benefit to small businesses.
Well, with the exception of the ability to now take deductions, your 280E tax deductions, that's really the only benefit that all businesses across the board are going to gain. However, as a Schedule III substance, banks are still going to be, risk adverse and unlikely to bank cannabis, whether it's Schedule 1, 2, 3, or anything else. SBA loans are still not going to be accessible because it is still going to be a federally scheduled substance. And SBA, as we know, is one of the avenues that lower income and Black and Brown people use to access capital. And if SBA loans are not going to be an option, then we're going to continue to be in the same boat that we're currently in. Most importantly, it appears that, as we know, a lot of pharma is in favor of this rescheduling. And so by putting it under Schedule 3, it might shift to being regulated by the FDA, something that the majority of small business owners and Black and Brown folks have zero experience with. It's a convoluted process. It's a very expensive process that we are wholly unfamiliar with. And so if this does end up being regulated by the FDA as a Schedule 3 substance, that's really going to leave small businesses in a lurch. And we don't know what that might mean for all of the nearly 40 jurisdictions that have legalized either medical and or adult use. We have no idea what it's going to mean if the FDA becomes the regulator. Is that going to disrupt those markets, many of which have been built on the principles of equity and reparations? So it's really an unknown how Schedule 3 will positively impact small businesses, but it's pretty much known how it won't positively impact small businesses.
Outside of 280E, of course, we won't.
Right, outside of 280E.
And there are, I would say, probably at least between 100,000 and 200,000 additional decisions that have to be made at the federal level before we have any indication of how it will impact small businesses and what the regulatory construct will look like. Because at this point, it could kind of go in a lot of different ways, regardless of the schedule that it falls under. The regulatory body isn't automatically assigned, even if you do get into a Schedule 3 category, right?
Right.
Okay. So, Tony, having heard that, particularly with your background and having done the research that you've already done, knowing the entrepreneurs in the space, and having seen the rollout of not legalization, but small businesses activating in Washington, what are your thoughts? What are your initial reactions?
I just think Rafi unearthed so much there, and with so many small Black and Brown businesses have seen this as a new opportunity, a new frontier that they're excited about engaging in, but not seeing it or thinking about the limitations that still exist, right? And even if it gets rescheduled, and people have to think it's going from being in a category with, say, LSD and heroin to being in a category with like fentanyl, oxycodone, right? And so the regulations that will come with that, we don't know, but it still may not open up things as much as people anticipate. And I think for me, working in the space and helping disenfranchised communities all this time, you kind of get tired of seeing these things that are shiny, that look shiny anyway, that look like they may open up economic doors, but then they may not. And so, I'm sitting here thinking like, that's why we got to have people like Rafi, like you, like at the table to really, really talk about what needs to happen. Because if not, we'll be in the same situation we've been in where we're just on the outside looking in, and which is unfortunate. And this stuff ultimately has even deeper implications here in the District of Columbia. We are a federal city, right? And so, when
And
you
are the
think
only
about
one.
right, exactly. In the federal land, and you can't use weed on Metro, and all of the things that when you talk about our criminal justice system being probably 97% African American, all of the things. So, and I can't help but to think about can return to citizens even now, maybe ownership, maybe when we talk about like just working in the space, particularly when you talk about it, again, it's a drug and it's used looked at from a medical lens, particularly at this point. So what are the limitations again, as far as employment and all of the things that were sold to this community around why this would be a good step? So those are my thoughts initially. And we definitely got to be at those tables to clear the path for people, all of our people, to be able to participate. and grow from it.
So speaking of tables and who's at
Can
what,
I add one thing?
of course, Rafi, go ahead.
Just one thing, because we are all native Washingtonians here, and Tony touched on the fact that we are a district, we are a federal district, we do not have statehood, we don't have self-determination here. Currently, we are prevented from enacting our adult sales market because Congress has blocked it. Congress has stated that we cannot alter any laws in DC that affect Schedule I substances. Well, if we move to Schedule III, Congress can do the same thing. They can just say, you know what, DC, you can't alter any laws that affect any substance that is listed under the Controlled Substances Act. So really, full decriminalization and removal of cannabis from the CSA is the only path forward for Washington, D.C.
So this is a great segue, Rafi. I think Tony had talked about being at the table, and then you're now talking about legislative changes at the federal level. And I think where I wanted to go with the next question was, we're in very closed door room conversations all of the time. We don't have other people like us at the table quite often. And more often than not, we have a pathway for conversations that so many of our peers and folks in our community don't have. I want to get your thoughts on, how do everyday citizens who are interested in this sector or who already engaged in this sector activate? Like, what very concrete steps can they take to have their voices heard, or to aggregate voices in a very responsible way, and get their voices collectively heard? Like, what are those steps that people can take? Because a lot of people don't understand how these legislative processes work. And it ain't just about holding up a sign and picketing. That is not the move. I mean, there's a lot more, right? There are a lot of loud people that can get on TikTok and everything else and talk a whole lot. But this is a cash game in a lot of ways. And a lot of people don't understand that. And so I want you all to be honest about what moves the needle when it comes to access, and when it comes to being heard, and when it comes to having people trust your voice that are legislators.
Well, I think the ability to, galvanize people is important, obviously, to the political process. In this matter specifically, when you talk about DC, Rafi just sort of alluded to, we don't have a voice there. And so it kind of puts us in a very unique situation. Obviously, we got our queen, Eleanor Holmes Norton, on the hill, but she doesn't have, we don't have a voting member, right? So long story short, I think it's important for district residents to speak in one voice around our own self-determination and how we want statehood, how we, want to be able to control our own destiny. I think, but in this specific particular thing, maybe pushing DC residents to support Maryland and Virginia residents who have voting members, in Congress, obviously in the House and in the Senate. I think that's probably what I think would be the best route. And just people just more generally need to know that those folks work for you. You can schedule meetings. Organization is important, though. Knowing the facts, even knowing what how people feel on the opposing side of an issue, I think is always important. But galvanizing people that are in survival mode, people that have to go to work, people that, what I mean. You talked about it being a cash game. A lot of times, people don't have the time and the resources to fight as much as I think they will want to. But we have to model that for them. And I think all three of us have been in a position to bring the voice of the people in a way. And I think we have to continue to, look back and train other folks to do the same thing. I think that's the way we, get people in the process. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Rafi, what are your thoughts on this?
So I think cannabis is an issue that touches so many broader issues. And so you don't have to be a cannabis
subject matter expert
proponent. You don't have to be a cannabis expert. You don't even necessarily have to be, pro cannabis. But if you are a housing justice advocate, cannabis touches you.
It sure
If
does.
you are an environmental justice advocate, cannabis touches
Definitely
you.
touches you.
If you are fighting for health equity,
Touches you.
cannabis touches you. And so I think that it's important as people in the cannabis space to reach beyond our circles into those folks, the tenants' rights advocates, the health equity advocates, and really broaden our coalitions, because those people are already in the room. They're already going to the Hill, they're already going to their state house, they're already going to their council to talk about those issues. And so if you're able to say, hey, while you're on the Hill talking about this thing, can you also maybe put in a plug for how cannabis impacts these things that you care about too? And I think that's one of the things that we are missing, particularly here in Washington, D.C. We've got this tiny, niche of cannabis advocates, but we're not really tapping into all of the broader things, the broader implications, and really bringing in a larger coalition of folks. And I think that that's the real key. And you've seen that work in so many other jurisdictions. I'm looking at it now in Virginia. The work that Marijuana Justice is doing is just brilliant. They've done it in New Jersey, and it's a formula that works. Bring in folks from all of the different advocacy sectors fighting for all of the other progressive social issues that we want. And cannabis is going to touch all of them.
I think that's brilliant and absolutely correct. And you see other coalitions, especially on the business side, tapping into that, whether it's healthcare that they're tapping into, the banks, they're tapping into the banks who have a very strong lobby because it's money related. And they use those relationships as leverage when they're going in to advocate on behalf of themselves or the industry that they represent. And so I do see that being really, really effective. I think, for a person that's just getting started in politics and understanding legislation and how it works, it's scary, right? Like, I think we all sort of came into it step by step by step. I was in the nonprofit sector before I moved into the for-profit real estate development sector. We all have different backgrounds, but Tony, you started because it mattered to you.
It's personal.
Yeah, it was very personal for you. Talk a bit, Tony, for me about how do we set aside our fears and push through the I'm of color and I don't know these white people. I don't know what type of music they listen to. I don't know what their interests are. They don't trust me. I don't trust them. I'm trying to go into their space and speak on something that matters. How does one get to a place of trust when there feels like there's a big disconnect or there feels like we don't have a lot in common? Help people understand how to push beyond that. Because that's a very simple first step, right? Getting beyond I don't know these people.
Yeah, I think, and these spaces are not, they're unusual to me, uncharted territory.
It's
I think people,
unfamiliar.
first of all, you have to be, I spoke about my situation being personal. And I think for most people that get into pushing for any cause, that it has some personal value to you, right? And I think, a person have to understand that if they're committed to making real change, that you're going to have to go into uncharted territory, but it's worth it, right? And you'll find your tribe, you'll build alliances. That's why I kind of spoke too about just trying to learn, other people, be interested in that and seeing it as actually a tool in helping you to achieve what you're trying to achieve. We all need allyship, no matter what we're trying to do. And I think it's important to just trust that you can build those allies. And also, I feel like, innately, we all have the power to influence other human beings, right? And that's what I think ultimately, if you're making legislative changes or inspiring legislative changes, that's really what it is. You're influencing people to do something that you think is worth doing. And I think it's endless examples of folks now. I think more so than before, people that people can identify with, people that people can touch, people that people see. You can look at Rafi, you can look at you, they can look at myself, they look at a laundry list of other people to say, okay, well, if they can do it, I can do it as well. And be open to suggestions, ask a lot of questions. Part of my, I think if I've had success, has been about that, continuously, seeking knowledge and looking to learn and grow. Yeah,
And I
that's
think
what I would say.
Thank you, Tony. And I think you're also humble. Like, I mean, we've known each other since we were kids. You went to Gonzaga, right? And
Correct.
Gonzaga was predominantly white. You were one of only a handful of people of color, but in particular, a handful of Black Americans and even smaller number of people who were from the city. You know, you lived around a corner up the street, I should say.
Facts.
But that was 4 years of concentrated time around a totally different culture and having to learn people. So it was a humbling experience, and you knew, like, I had to figure it out. I remember you reading the Washington Post at your table almost every morning
Yeah.
because you were
Yeah.
learning about other things outside of your little world. You were trying to figure out
Correct.
what else was going on, right? And if you didn't do that, you would have been left out of so many conversations because contextually you didn't know what was happening. So I think humility has a lot to do with this. I think being knowledgeable, reading. A lot of people got a lot of opinions and they don't read. Like, so
Yeah.
they
Agreed.
don't know a lot. Like, they got a lot
Yeah.
to say and they ain't got no context or no education on the
Yeah.
matter.
And I would say, Christina,
Yeah, go ahead.
sure. Just before we move on, I think that's such a brilliant point because in today's world, right, you don't even have like excuses for not knowing. Like information is at your fingertips, and so when you're going into these rooms and you just have not done your due diligence, I think that also can be you can shoot yourself in the foot in that way. So people got to understand how important it is to have a thirst for knowledge and to probably be a bit more cosmopolitan than we've had to be in the past, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Rafi, I saw you agreeing with me. What were your thoughts on that? Or do you have anything to add?
Just in terms of like the practical steps, we can start small, like start at your local civic association, and then maybe you move to your council, and then maybe you move to your state house, and then maybe you hit the hill. But also look for organizations that you might be aligned with. Lobby days have become a very big thing across sectors. I think I did my first official kind of lobby day was actually around the arts, and so you can find organizations, no matter what your passion, no matter what your cause, that are having days of lobbying. And they give you the information, they train you up, they tell you who to see, what they care about, and how to fit what you care about into their passions as well. And so those are kind of the practical things. Start small and then look for organizations that are aligned with the things that you're passionate about, and get in that way. And so I've been lobbying for DC statehood. I've been lobbying for more money for the arts, more equitable money for the arts, obviously for cannabis justice and reparations. So find your thing. It may be cannabis, it may be something else, but go out and get involved.
Hey,
Thank
Christine, I know we got to go. I'm sorry. Rafi just said something what I felt like I wish somebody would have told me early on, right? Also, like we come from a place where okay, if it's a representative or a council member, whomever, you come into it like, I want to talk to that person. If you talk to a staffer, that is not, being somebody being dismissive to you. Like talking to those people is like how you get things done. And a lot of times people coming into this space, trying to invoke change sometimes don't understand. And you're not going to always talk to quote unquote the person, but their staffers are the people that kind of make things happen. So never take that as a disrespectful move.
I think that's a good
Become their best friend.
Tony, ma'am, listen, my
Be
mother
the person they
always
call when
told
they need
me,
advice on something.
yes,
It's like, I'm gonna call Tony, I'm gonna call
Rafi.
Christina.
Yeah, I mean, the
Exactly.
reality is the staff does the work. The staff writes the legislation, okay? The staff is the one that has the knowledge. One elected representative does not have time to be a subject matter expert on anything, okay? Like not one issue. That is not their strength. The people that are in the field doing the work are the subject matter experts. And the people that digest those people's understanding of their issues is the staff, the director of legislative affairs, the folks who are in those offices on communications. They're the ones talking to the people in the field, and they're the ones crafting and modifying legislation and talking to other offices about how to make this better. Who are the people on what, on these issues on this side, on that side. So it's really the staff that can really help advance things. I was saying, my mom and dad used to always say, Don't ever be dismissive of people who you consider the help, or people you consider of not being the person. Those actually almost always are the people. It's the janitors, it's the gatekeepers, it's the people that staff who's perceived as the person, right? They're the ones that the most important people, according to so many people, listen to. Those are the ones that they go to. So I think that's an excellent point. And I would say, sort of to something else that you said, Rafi, you said basically find your thing. It doesn't have to be cannabis. All of us are in service in different ways. And I think that's really important. I think that it's important to encourage our folks in particular to be, active about what matters to them and what they're passionate about, and go hard in the paint in that. Tell me, guys, if you all had to leave with final thoughts, whether it be in an instruction, whether it be a statement, think for a second about what that would be, and then let me know what you would want to tell the folks who are listening in today, whether it be about rescheduling, whether it be about cannabis, whether it be about activism, whatever you want to leave a final thought on.
I mean, I have one that I always leave folks with, because we are a disenfranchised 700,000 Americans in the District of Columbia, and we have an election coming up. And so for people in the 50 states, who you vote for matters. Who you send to Washington matters, because it's only your folks who are going to determine my self-determination. So I'm asking folks around the nation, make sure that the Congress people you are sending to Washington support statehood for DC. Make sure that they are people who are not going to block the very progressive policies, the very reparative and restorative policies that we as Washingtonians want. So when you're sending your folks to Congress and they have a platform, ask them very frankly, where do you stand on statehood for DC and self-determination for a plurality Black city? And don't send the trash here. Keep it over there with you all. Send us folks who support self-determination for all.
Yeah, I love that, Rafi, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because that's thinking well beyond what is right in front of us. And that's sort of just getting our own statehood, ensuring that before we get there, that we also have allies along the way across the US. And that's a message we can share with our friends, our colleagues, people who may not be right next to us in the district. Tony, did you have any final thoughts
No,
that you wanted to share?
I just really wanted to say I just concur with that, because man, but I would as it relates to speaking like very, very specifically about people that have been formerly incarcerated, that they've paid their debt to society, that they should have their full rights restored, particularly from an economic and public safety standpoint, that people can be involved in every industry, can take care of their families, can grow their businesses. I think an investment there is an investment in all of us. And as we've been talking about the cannabis, the budding, if you will, pun intended, cannabis industry, and as it will grow, I just would really, it'd be heartbreaking if the formerly incarcerated population won't be able to fully participate in that.
All right. Well, thank you both for joining today on the Greenwall Kickback. All right, guys.